Hello friends, welcome back to That Drawing Show. Today we have a very special episode of the show because I finally finished some work and I can share it with you guys. And I think it'll be fun to look at the different stages of what I did and I don't know, hopefully make it entertaining. If you remember our show with the Procreate iPad up a couple days ago, I was practicing drawing dogs, and I finally finished the dog commission, and I think it turned out really good. So what I want to do is split the screen and kind of take you with individual slices of time through how I did it and how it turned out and the progression. It didn't really make sense to do a time lapse of the drawing because it took hours and hours and hours. Really, it took almost 2 days to do this piece. But I think that I captured every step of the way, and we can talk about some of the decisions that I made for better or for worse. Let's start off with the photographs so we can refamiliarize ourselves with what the assignment was. This was a very sweet sweetheart that I got sent from a very dear friend. And this is one of the two dogs. And really, this was the pick that more than anything inspired the final piece. What an absolute sweetheart. Look at the purple sweater and the little beads around the neck. This is exactly what this dog looked like, by the way. She was like the granny from Looney Tunes. Think about that in your mind. And this was her companion. If you remember our show about drawing dogs, this was her companion. And this pic is a little bit misleading because this pic makes this dog look like a French bulldog, but this was no French bulldog. And the other pic, the one here on the right, is a little bit difficult to make out because of the foreshortening. Here we go. This was another pic that I thought was so quintessential and had so much personality that it didn't need much caricature. And this is something that I want to talk about on today's show. You get the idea with art and with caricature that you always need to squash and stretch everything, and that the drawing is, you're somehow cheating the customer or yourself if you do not make a great exaggeration of what you're seeing. But I think that's a mistake. If you are given a subject who has this much personality, just try to convey what you've been given. Let this come across to the viewer. I remember the quote from our drawing force that your role as an artist is to arrest life, which is motion, in such a way that 100 years from now, a stranger who's never met you and never seen the piece and never seen this dog will see your artwork and it will come alive again. And if you can do that with this face, with this punam, as we say where I come from, then you've been a success, even if you didn't squash and stretch everything to the point where it doesn't even look like him anymore. So this again was another pick that made me think, okay, this should inform my approach to this drawing. This is exactly what the dog looked like when I showed up. There were huge beds everywhere in this beautiful home. The dogs were wearing the sweaters, chew toys. This is exactly what it looked like. I went to deliver the piece yesterday. And this, again, look at this face. What a sweetheart. This is exactly the look that the female dog gave me when I came in. What an absolute sweetheart. Yes, I wanted to capture this face. So you see what we've been given here. Oh, and then finally, yes, not a French bulldog. It looks like a little dog in this photo. This was not a little dog. But either way, I think what I wanted to do came across. So let's go back to the first drawing, or the first photograph. I thought grandmother from Looney Tunes. What about the dog like knitting a sweater like the one she's wearing? And then I thought, how about have the male dog be like kind of like a man in a recliner smoking a pipe and reading the paper with slippers and a robe. Make this a mid-century modern Norman Rockwell domestic scene. A scene of domestic tranquility in a beautiful home, modest American working folks enjoying marital banality. The dad is in his chair, the mom is on her chair. They have their own personalities and pursuits. There's love there, but at the same time, they're apart, doing their own things, and comfortable in their own space together. So I thought, okay, this is these are interesting concepts. This is a nice thing. This was supposed to be a gift for his wife. He was giving this to his wife, and they were going to put it in the home. It was going to be in the breakfast nook, people. So I thought, okay. And I thought, how am I going to present this? And if you remember, my initial presentation was to use the paper vertically and present the figures in like a comic book 3, depth way. Like this photograph, once you start experimenting with depth and working in Z, you can stretch all the way back. And there's room for a lot of things, almost an infinite number of things, if you're willing to draw small enough. But with all of those details, I thought I might not convey all those themes that I was talking about earlier. And I remembered a page from Albert Loomis's book, Creative Illustration. Creative Illustration, Albert Loomis. And this is the page. He talks about a couple different things, theories of composition. And the one that I probably will go over in a future show is called informal subdivision. This is formal subdivision. This is probably the page before informal subdivision. And in particular, the drawing here on the right that says power stuck in my mind, but any one of these drawings conveys the right idea. I'm going to read this and try to follow what I'm saying here. Formal subdivision, writes Loomis, applies best to subjects of a dignified or religious nature. There are times when we wish to achieve a dignity of arrangement. Since the Creator's basic design, the Creator being God, the Creator's basic design for animate form is the duplication of one side by the other, that is to say symmetry, such as two sides of the human body, arrangement based on the same plan takes on the same sort of dignity. It does not mean that each side must duplicate exactly, but there should be a feeling of complete equalization of the units or masses, the lines and spaces, from one side to the other. Church murals invariably follow this plan. It may be used to great advantage in symbolical subjects, appeals for charity, heroic subjects, or to suggest peace and serenity. You can see where I'm going with what I said earlier. I wanted these dogs to appear like a Norman Rockwell painting. Well, formal balance was almost always the approach in earlier times, and great compositions have been built with it. It is largely the formality of design which leads which lends such magnificence to the works of Michelangelo, Rubens, and Raphael. Formal subdivision may also be used informally if one is adept enough. That is the next piece where he talks about informal subdivision. We'll get to that in a future show. So I thought, okay, let's not go deep into the page. Let's present these figures in a very symmetrical way, flat, and let the individual personalities of the dogs that we saw in those earlier photos speak for themselves. So let's see how I did this. Okay, yeah. First thing I did was I literally, is this coming through here on the screen here? Yeah. I literally cut and pasted the dog into a scene that I thought I put a rocking chair. I just like hacked out a rocking chair on one side, and then on the other side I found a pic. Let's put this full screen and move it over here. I found a pic of a recliner like the one that my Papa Ozzy had, my grandfather had in the living room that he would sit in. Papa Ozzy's chair. Don't sit in Papa Ozzy's chair. No, he didn't speak like that, but he had a recliner like this, and that was his chair. And I would sneak into it when he wasn't at home and sit in Papa Ozzy's chair. Papa Ozzy, as it turned out, as I later realized in life, was not a big man. But at the time, his chair seemed larger than life. So I found this pic and I thought, okay, let's just see if we can get that chair in there. You see how I drew it in? And then I cut and pasted the dog in, and I thought, balance it out, make the head bigger, not because it's a caricature, but because you want the the head area to balance out the gag that you have going on down below, which is the knitting. You see how I have her with the knitting and the needles and the, you know, holding the ball of yarn between her feetsies and knees. So when this came in, I thought, okay, this is the drawing. Let's just see if we can carry on with this idea. Let's see if we can do these in order here. Oh, hold on, that's too much. Two. Yeah, so then the next step, I got the dog in, and I did the same thing. I didn't try to make a big caricature out of it. You can say, oh my God, you cheated. Oh my God. But this goes back to what Wally would say, never draw what you can copy. Never copy what you can cut and paste. He said that back in the 60s. So maybe it was never draw from memory what you can draw from reference, never draw from reference what you can copy, and never copy what you can cut and paste right into the drawing. So I cut and paste, but I had made some adjustments as I work. You know, as you work along, you start making some adjustments. You see certain subtle things that you would like to change. One thing I wanted to make sure is that I could convincingly get the pipe into the mouth and the cheek and make it look good. I used creative concealment that we talked about in a previous episode. Put that newspaper in there. A, it sells the gag. B, I don't have to draw the torso. Conceal what you don't want to draw in a way that makes sense. Also, like women used to understand, the less you see, the more mystery is to the drawing, the more interesting it is. So it works to further, like you're obscuring some of the story. It draws the user in, the mystery of it. Now, because it was formal subdivision, I wanted to maintain the principles of Loomis, so I started drawing lines every, 2 inches spaced evenly, and I started aligning things, making little adjustments to the eyes, to the nose, to make sure that they lined up according to these formal. By formal, he means even mathematical, like having evenly spaced grid lines. These are like 2-inch evenly spaced lines that go throughout the thing. And I think that what I did was I keyed down here. I thought, okay, this is something that you can't really change. This is like a fixed point here, the end table. So make the grid lines. Let's do this here. Make the grid lines. Start here. This was like my base. That was it. It wasn't so much that they were any number of inches. It was, okay, whatever that is, make sure that all of them are the same. Okay? And then start making little tweaks. Make sure that, like I said, make sure that this is almost perfectly right on the center of the nose. This hits her eyeball perfect. Make sure that this comes out here and hits. This is the end point of the rocking chair leg. His foot goes out to here, end point here, pipe, hand, you know what I mean? Like, make sure if you're going to use this system that you actually follow it. Her hands come together almost exactly there, you know? And I did that vertically, but then I also did that horizontally. And like I said, you make little adjustments. Make sure they meet here. Boom, boom. Right on the nose. Eyeball, eyeball. I ended up, it looks like, scooching this down, although that may have been scooched back up in the final. But this is something I would have adjusted. Make sure that those hit. Trust the system. Trust the process. Like, one of the things that Loomis talks about in the book is that the process is there and has worked and had been worked out over centuries and billions of other people doing art. Let it work for you. Let it solve some of your problems for you so that you can focus on other things and trust that it's going to work out. So, yeah, aligning things along the axes, the crosses of formally subdivided lines. And then I also wanted to find the exact center here. This is right there on one of those diagonals. You know, and it's like, well, you know, in a way, it's not real science because I'm going after the fact and ignoring the ones that don't, you know. But if you can align as much as possible, like Loomis said, the symmetry does not have to be exact. But if you align as much as possible, you are subconsciously conveying the symmetry and then letting the user focus. The whole idea is that because you have the symmetry and because the mind doesn't need to figure out what's going on and the depth and the Z, the mind can focus directly on the gag. This is why almost all gags in comedy, at least they used to be when people knew what they were doing in animation, were presented very flat. Cartoons presented very flat. You can set the thing up in 3 dimensions, but when it comes to that punchline and delivering the gag, deliver it flat. Even in Marx Brothers, even in Three Stooges, when it comes to conveying the gag and making sure you get that idea across, convey it in flat 2D, and as we're finding here, formally divided stage space. So, okay, once I had a alignment that I thought was good, then I lighten everything up. Why? Why is it a good idea to throw like a 70% white over everything? Well, you know, and then zoom out. I'm trying to zoom out in a way that you guys can appreciate here. Sorry, hold on. Well, the reason why is because once you have equalized all of those gradations and you're just looking at a very, if you were to imagine now this histogram only contains a very narrow range. There's just like a couple shades of gray and there's white, that's it. There's no peaks of black influencing you. Nothing is creating depth unnecessarily. Now you're really looking at silhouette. Now you are really looking at the balance, like the Loomis was talking about, the balance between the shapes, and you're not being influenced at all by the subject matter because everything is really grayed out. Make sure that it works at this level. Make sure that it works at this level and keep zooming out. Zoom it out to a postage stamp size. Sorry. And make sure it continues to work even as you get smaller. And for me, what work meant was I wanted to make sure that her head tilt, which I guess to you guys is, hold on, this way, although it's not coming through right on screen, but right, you want her head tilt, you know what I mean, and his head tilt to convey. He's holding it up almost like he's sitting on the toilet, and she's like, oh, no. You want that to go. You don't lose that in your search for caricature humor. Here, I'm going to close some of these earlier ones. Okay. Now, once it looks good, it's time to print it out. That's right, you heard me right. And I colorize everything. I colorize everything with like a light burnt umber, crimson, a tone that makes sense as an undertone. And there's a couple reasons for this, but one big reason is because there's, you know, look at how oil painters work. There's nothing wrong with having an underpainting. I saw the most beautiful artist on Instagram who would do a very nice underdrawing in pencil and then cover the canvas with a very almost opaque layer of color. But it wasn't opaque. It was opaque enough that you couldn't see it, but translucent enough that she could still go in there and see her underdrawing. The underdrawing is there. Don't waste it. Don't obliterate it entirely, but get it to be light so that it just serves as an undertone for the color we're about to work on. Remember, we're going to be working with watercolor media. That's what markers are. So, okay, here we go. So, yeah, I printed it out like this, and then I did another layer of line work. That's what I did. I did another layer of line work. I printed it out, and then I did another layer of line work like this. At some point, you have to go from a kind of a rough idea to this, and you know, once you have the line work in, you can. I think that these eyes needed to be a little bit further apart. I hope I got that conveyed in the final. This, though, is right on, right? Her look is right on. And I also got some nice details in there on the hands and clarified a lot of things. One thing that I wanted to make sure I got across down here was the... you see this bag here? It recedes in the Z dimension. And because it recedes in the Z dimension, it gives us the opportunity for some interesting overlap here. We can put the bag end there, then we can put one ball of yarn there, and then we can put something else there, and then we can put something else in the back, and then, you know, that can inform the eye to go deeper into the drawing. If you use overlap on subtle details like this that are not part of the main focal point, you create the depth that you need to sell other parts of the drawing. You learn that from doing still lifes. Like, still life is all about interesting and creative use of overlap. The peach is overlapping, the banana is overlapping a leaf. So I thought, okay, use some creative overlap down here. I could have done a little bit better with the shapes. My shape variation is not that great. I should have had some square shapes, but I didn't want to do the research. I didn't want to do the research to see what an actual bag looked like. I should also continued the bag up there, so it was like that behind the thing. I didn't want to do enough research, and I really paid for it when it came to this a little bit later on. We'll see. I had an ashtray and a teacup. I'm kind of trying to convey the mid-century modern look here, and then the lamp. Probably should have had a pull chain there. Like I said, didn't want to do the research. Slippers, I thought like leather slippers. That would be cute. Make sure that you have his little feetsies. The pipe. I thought, okay, this is going to work. The gag is working. Put the Home Sweet Home, that's called needlepoint, in the background. This could have been something that I just printed out on the final. As it turned out, I redrew it. That was a mistake. So then I printed this out. Now, hold on a second. We're going backwards. Hold on a second. Hold on. I printed this thing out, but I printed it out, like I said, very, very light. And I'll show you like the way that I printed it out. Hold on a second. I printed it out like, you know, maybe even lighter than that. Like literally, like so light you can barely see it. You know, I print it out like this. And whatever undertone is there, it works. And in the meantime, it gives me the chance to draw over it and do the line work in a way that carries over what needs to be carried over. Let's take a look at the line work. Yeah, let's take a look at the line work. So, oh, this was, you know what, like I said, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit out of order here. This is a great look at when I printed it out the first time as I was working out the details. I don't want people to think like I'm any kind of a genius. I work out those details. It's messy, it's ugly. Sometimes I lose some of that good formal subdivision in the process, but the idea is to work out those details in a way that is fun. Do a little bit of experimentation, you know what I mean? That's a chance to do your research and figure out what shapes work and what shapes work for here, and you know what I mean? This is the stage to do it. Sometimes I'll work in a blue pencil and then work over it with lead pencil. No shame in it. Here's the final. And again, because you're going to scan it in and do Photoshop magic anyway, it can be ugly and rough, you know? Yeah, this is how. So then we got to this, and then it's time to do the line work. So like I said, this is a great example. You see how light it is? You can barely even see the line work. And it's, you know, some of the line work is just pure white. It just fades out entirely. And then I start doing my inking over it. And I'm using a variety of different pens, but thin line stuff and sometimes even ballpoint. Never underestimate or discount the beauty of a Bic crystal ballpoint pen. That's probably what I used for most of this stuff inside here. Line quality is important, but what I'm really trying to do is preserve the shapes, make sure that you have good volumes, make sure that things are big and fun and look like they're chunky enough that you can reach out and touch them. Feetsies, the newspaper, make sure you got the folds in the paper are credible. Don't overdo it. Don't over render. Remember, you're going to be rendering next, so do the line work. Just define what needs to be defined to make sure you got those shapes right. All right, here we go with all the line work done, and I ended up starting the markering. And I do this markering like any watercolor artist does. I do it in layers. A lot of these markers I make my own colors, but if you don't want to do that, feel free to use the Crayola Markers of the World kit, which is very good. Either way, it's layers, and a lot of time with the layers you're defining shapes and creating like some surface texture and having fun and creating some like wood grain, making mistakes, hopefully correcting them. Sometimes you get lucky like I did up here, and you here on the lamp, and you just have a nice turn of mind and you're able to get something that looks good. Sometimes you don't get so lucky. You see, if you remember earlier, we had a very nice shape here, and it was clear that like this was supposed to be the shadow plane, and then this was going to be the shadow plane, and this was going to be light here. This perhaps doesn't really convey it as good as it was. So clear, and I started to lose it, and I realized that, and by the time I recovered, there was almost nothing I could do about it. Here, look at how nice that is. You see this light here? This is all light, shadow, light, 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 nice shadow here. Even here on the nose, my failure to really understand it deeply at this point carried over here, and you see I just didn't even carry it over at all. And it just kind of became a big mess. One of the nice things about working with the markers is you can recover. Once you realize you start messing up, you can always get darker. It's not easy to get lighter, but you can always get darker. So start light, and if you realize you're making a big muddy mess, you can always recover. Eventually, did I recover? I don't know. I started, is that really how, hold on a second. I think there's a lot of steps were skipped. You know, this stuff is happening late at night. I want to make it clear. I am doing some of this stuff at 2 in the morning, and it looks like I did skip over a lot. Maybe there's some other good photos, but let's take a look at where we're at in this stage of the drawing. As usual, Photoshop makes it so painfully hard. Okay, so where are we? Well, we put a lot of additional layers of color on things like the on things like this, on the end table here. Whereas before we had a very sandy wood, now I really made it gold with additional layers upon layers. Here I made this gold with layers upon layers. I created nice colors here, although I really sort of lost the theme of what she's doing here because, again, I didn't use reference. I modeled the dog real nicely. really, hours of work here were skipped between the two last two images. But let's just try to review what is working, what isn't. What is working, you know, you're going to eventually put a background in. You want to convey this light. In order to convey this light, you want this area to be light, but you also want to bring the color over here, and I did. You see I have a little bit of color here and a little bit of color here. That looks real good there. That looks, real good there. A little bit of color, not too much, but just enough there. That looks good. So that I colored those edges there. I think that was effective. Just bringing the color onto the edges there so that, at least that light source is believable. Now, if I would have done a much better job over here, like before, that would have been great. But at least this light source, let's make it believable. Secondary light source. I have a nice light area there. It's like, okay, let's make it believable. I did a nice job here with the dog's under waddle. I didn't go crazy and just color it all in and make it a mess. This looks good too, the pipe. You know how I did that pipe is I started off with one dark burnt umber stroke. Here, hold on. I started off with one real dark stroke right there. Right there, that one right, hold on. That one right there. And that was kind of like the core shadow. And then I took a little bit of a lighter brown color. I went over that one, and then I modeled the rest of the pipe with that. And, kept that thing light right there. Kept that light stripe, and kept that edge light. I think that worked out real nice. This is just pencil on the newspaper with a little bit of gray marker. Believe it or not, because people are so used to seeing writing and printing, you can't go wild. You have to be disciplined when you make a newspaper or anything, if you're like reproducing the screen of a phone. You can't go wild. You have to be disciplined about it because people are so used to seeing it look right that if you get messy and don't make the letters right or just sort of go all over the place without straight lines, you can't sell it. So it's good to take your time if you're ever doing, like I said, a newspaper, a phone screen, a computer screen, and put the work in. Same type of pick. Yeah, here we go. Here's the final. We're probably going to see a few intermediaries here. So let's just take a quick look. Are these all the finals? Yeah, these are all the finals. Well, anyway, so okay, here we are, the final. The final. I had a few decisions to make. Remember, I had all that gold, and I thought, we could do a contrasting color like light blue in the background, but A, I don't have a great marker for that. I didn't want to make up a custom marker. And B, I really wanted to convey, I didn't want the background to recede too much. I wanted it to seem like they were in a home. I wanted it to seem like an old-timey wallpaper. So I started making, and I've done before this kind of a stroke where you fan it out like this, and then you fan it out like this, and you fan it out like this, and you fan it out like this. You see this kind of thing in art school drawings. You can fill a space with those type of strokes nicely, and it will create, and especially if you give it some openness, some open room, it presents a nice background. And then I shaded over it. You see how I shaded over it with the art sticks, and I drew these light lines just to give an indication of a seam in a wall. I wasn't trying to go crazy because it's supposed to blend in the background. So I just scored a couple times with lines to give it an indication that we're looking at a wall. And then here, I wanted the light to break up because, the yellow to break up because it's light. And I think that works. I think it conveyed it. And then down here, again, we're using Crayola markers. I hate to whisper like Joe Biden. So these are markers that are going to show the brush strokes. But remember what we were saying earlier about deliberateness in art. Show the brush strokes. If you're going to show the brush strokes, show the brush strokes. So I made little brush strokes here in the background. and then bigger brush strokes up here in the foreground to convey depth, you know? I think it works. And the little bit of edge lighting that I did earlier, remember those little yellow highlights? You don't even see them now. It looks totally natural because now that you have the background in, everything is blending together. I did the needle point. I did a lot of pointillism for the needle point. It worked good in some areas. It did not work good here, where I thought, oh, maybe I should go over that. I thought, no, I'll just ruin it. I used a lighter red marker, one of the Crayola like window markers that it doesn't pop. It's hard to describe these markers. They're not meant to be used on paper. They're meant to be used on glass. So they recede into the background, which is what I wanted. I wanted this to recede. Even my signature I signed in one of those markers, so it would recede. I wanted this stuff to pop. So I used little white dots to pop the contrast even more there. You don't notice them once you zoom out. Oh, I also used a kind of a pointillist approach to the slippers, to the dog slippers. Here again, I'm trying to create depth. You know, you got the extreme white there, and you got the saturation. What creates depth? Let's talk about depth here real quick, people. Let's talk about depth. What is going to create depth in a drawing? Well, just by definition, depth is going to be the difference between two extremes. They could be extremes of contrast, where things in the extreme foreground, by the virtue of how lighting tends to work, are very dark, and then the background, where there's tons of light and ambient light all mixing together, what's it called? It'll be lighter in the background, so it fades into the background. So you can have contrast in light and dark. You can have contrast in saturation. Obviously, for the same reason as the light and dark, the things in the foreground are going to have a higher saturation. The things in the background are going to have a lower saturation and sort of blend together a little bit. So if you want to make things pop into the foreground, play with that. Notice here in the background. Notice here in the background, there's a lower contrast, and then here in the foreground of just this simple shape, I have the high saturation brush strokes, and then these lines going over the top. You know, contrast in shapes, contrast in saturation, make things pop to the foreground. I wish I was as strategic in other areas, but where it works, it does work. Anyway, I think that I did good with the eyes here. I kept his eyes far apart here. I made that little adjustment. A lot of nice things about this. I think that this teapot turned out nice. And overall, I feel like this was a very successful piece. And I framed it, and the client really liked it. So I think it was a success. I think that's going to wrap for today's show. I was really happy to be able to share something that I worked on with you guys, and I hope that I can do more pieces like this in the future and more interesting commissions. So thank you for tuning into that drawing show, and happy drawing.
There's some things I have to say.
Scott Gross.
Scott Gross, is that his name?
Scott is out in L.A.
I work fast and I'm a dealer. I write and direct. Yeah, that guy's great.
But none of them understand that, like, Cleveland is a bombed out third world hellhole.
I go on and on.
Well, that was tremendous fun.
The cat hair apocalypse. Baby, it's like Mad Max, but with cats. Like
Cat
Apocalypse.
For being on some chill shit. Oh Lord, got a whole lot to show for it. I mean, we can really get it, we can go for it. Oh Lord, got a whole lot to show for it. I mean, we can really get it, we can go for it. Oh Lord.
Hypocrisy and nonsense.
It's a combination.